Cops, what has so far been the creepiest call you've ever had to respond to? And what happened? Content warning. These stories contain descriptions of self-termination, self-harm, infant and child death, graphic descriptions, and are. Story 1. Got a report of a missing husband. He told his wife and family of 6 children that he was going to get his tires changed, but never returned, and this was 12 hours ago. They had purchased another house in a neighboring community, and the relationship with the wife was under pressure, so the wife assumed he was staying at the other house and claimed he would never kill himself. The strange thing about this report, though, was that he emptied his personal bank account into his wife's this morning as well. The wife explained this off, saying that they recently had a fight about finances, and he agreed that he was bad at money and maybe they should just have a joint account that she controls. On a hunch, I asked his 14-year-old boy if there were any areas in the mountains nearby that his father enjoyed going to, and the son identified a road about 10 miles away. It was nearing midnight, but I decided to drive to the top of this old and abandoned Forest Service road. As I drove through the snow and started to climb the road, I felt a gut feeling that I would 100% find this guy up there either thinking about or already acted out a self-termination. The snow-laid gravel road had some sign of travel, but no real indication of how fresh the vehicle tracks could be. As I reached the top of the road after an hour of travel, I was honestly surprised that I did not find his black truck. I spent the drive back down thinking about gut feelings and how they are unreliable, but that I somehow felt different about this one. As I traveled up the road, I did notice over a dozen smaller roads branching off, but they were not mapped, and I had already spent too much time on a single occurrence in a busy city with too few police officers. Nevertheless, I decided to check a single of these secondary roads, and about 3/4 of the way down, I picked a road at random to check, and sure enough, my headlights lit up the back end of a black truck about 100 yards past the first corner. Even if I hadn't memorized the license plate beforehand, I wouldn't have had to run it. It was clearly his. I radioed that I found the truck, parked my vehicle, and traveled 20 feet to his truck with my heart beating like I was doing it at a sprint rather than a normal walk. What I found inside was a mess of brains and blood caused by a self-inflicted shotgun wound under the chin. I'll save you from the description. There was just something about that gut feeling while traveling this abandoned and quiet mountain road, followed by a sense of being tricked by the gut feeling, then finding out it was true by discovering such a gruesome scene, having to wait 3 hours next to his truck waiting for body removal, and then to end it all by having to go to the family who was expecting good news to deliver to them the worst news possible. That makes me feel creeped out to this day. Story 2. I responded to a report of an unresponsive infant. When I arrived, all the family members were standing around casually in the front yard pointing into the house. I found the baby in the back room laying on her back on a bare mattress. I started CPR but realized the baby was probably already deceased. We rushed her out to the arrival ambulance hoping they had a way to bring her back. I learned she was the mother's second suspicious SIDS death, and I had her other children removed from her care. The difficult part was when I left the scene and went to the ER to see what came of the situation. As I walked in and asked where she was, an ER nurse walked over to me and handed me the deceased baby swaddled in a blanket and told me to wait for someone to show me to the morgue. So I'm standing there in the ER in uniform holding what everyone thinks is a live infant, but rather an infant corpse, and several people stop by wanting to see her and commenting how cute she is to see an officer holding a baby. I just smiled, but it killed me inside. I was ushered back to the morgue after what felt like an eternity and told I had to wait with the baby until the medical examiner arrived. They took the blankets off and laid her on a stainless steel gurney and left me alone with her again. I lounged around the morgue for about an hour waiting. By the time I got home several hours after the end of my shift, because this call came out 15 minutes before the end of my 10-hour shift, I laid down on my bed and cried for a long time. My youngest daughter was in daycare and my wife was at work. I really needed to hold both of them, so my house felt incredibly empty. My daughter was only slightly older than the infant, and when I was looking at her earlier, I kept seeing my own daughter. I didn't get any sleep at all before going back in for the night shift later that night. I know this thread said creepy stories, but thus far they have only been absolutely heartbreaking. I don't see any way that you could encounter stuff like this without it changing you and requiring some serious therapy. I can't even imagine having to deal with this. Story 3. Detention officer at a local jail here. We had a guy get brought in about 2 a.m. one night who we immediately knew was about to give us a fun time based on the way he was moving, quickly snapping the head back and forth, looking all over the room, etc. One of my coworkers and I stay with the booking officer to help her out when the crap inevitably hits the fan. The guy keeps rambling on throughout the whole process. Parts of his speech are understandable, but most of it is gibberish. At one point, he looks up at my coworker and says, "Would you blame me for it?" Trying to keep the guy calm, my coworker tells him, "Nah, man, no one can blame you." For whatever reason, this set the guy off. He leaps on the bench, and we both push him back down. My coworker is trying to get handcuffs on his other wrist. He was already handcuffed by one hand to the bench. And I'm holding him against the wall with every bit of strength I have. This mother effer was strong. I swear the bench was about to come up off the concrete when he first leapt at us. Once my coworker gets handcuffs on him, we take a step back. The guy throws his head back, eyes rolled all the way back, and lets out an inhuman scream that I've only heard in movies about demon possession. He then moves his head as if he's still looking around the room, but still with his eyes rolled into the back of his head, and spouts off more nonsense. I'm not Catholic, but I was very tempted to cross myself. The screaming, head throwing back, and eye rolling continued on for about 45 minutes. Every so often, he'd come back to reality and talk to us like a normal person for a moment, and then go back into crazy mode. Story 4. I was working in the crime unit, aka detective, for the state police agency I work for, and patrol got sent to one of the small towns in the county I work in for a report from neighbors in a series of row home apartments that there was an unbearable smell coming from a second-floor apartment. Patrol made entry and found the subject deceased from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. On the way there, the coroner called me. She ran with the local EMS crew and was on scene with the first responding trooper, and said, "Bring your hazmat suit. This is a bad one." I got there and I could smell it from the street. I went upstairs, and as I passed the wave of flies, I entered his bedroom. I saw what really couldn't be described as human. It was in the idle July 90-degree heat, and the dude was black as a black cat. When I got close, I noticed something odd. He had melted to the floor. The female forensic service girl asked, "Why is his skin moving?" Yep, thousands of maggots were now under his skin, which gave it the appearance that his skin was bubbling and moving. And yes, the gun was still in his right hand. It took the fire department effing shovels to scrape this guy off the floor. Not to mention the smell. Trust me, I've been to swamp bodies, lake bodies, heat bloat, but nothing like this. Crazy crap we see sometimes. And that right there is why my interest in going into forensics didn't last too long. I was seriously considering going to college for it because most bodies and whatnot don't bother me, but the one time I would have to see something like that, nope, couldn't do it. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video and have a great day. Story 5. Not a cop myself, but my dad is, and I asked him this one time. He told me it was when he went to this one house because a woman had called and said that men were breaking into the house. He gets there and he said it was immediately very clear that the woman was not exactly altogether mentally. He said she kept mumbling things and was very jumpy and skittish, not to mention that every single wall of her house apparently had at least 6 or 7 crosses on it, if not more. He calms her down, checks around the house for any signs of entry or just anything weird, and there's absolutely nothing that would indicate that anyone had been trying to or had been successful in breaking in. He said she followed him around the entire time and would point to things like a doorknob or window latches and say, "Oh, that's not where I left it. That's how they got in." He said the whole thing was fairly eerie, considering he was at this woman's house in the middle of the night surrounded by crosses and listening to her mumble on about random crap. To make her feel better, he did a sweep of the whole house to see if there was anyone inside, which there wasn't. He said the one thing that made it creepy for him was the fact that every few minutes she'd say something like, "Oh, they're here again," or "He's right behind us, I can feel it." Story 6. My dad worked in a precinct with one of the highest crime rates in New York City. I think it had the highest murder rate during his year on the job. Anyway, he won't tell the stories about what he's seen because they're mostly horrific and still give him nightmares almost 15 years off the job. However, I do remember he told us one story where he was really drunk. A woman in her 20s walked into her apartment building late from work one night and was waiting for the elevator. It opened and the only person in there was a creepy-looking guy. Though apprehensive, she got in and pressed her floor number but noticed that the basement button was pressed. Normally after 9 p.m., maintenance would lock the basement button to prevent random people from going down there and effing with crap. I guess someone forgot to lock it. The creepy guy ended up taking her down there, tying her up, and arring and torturing her for hours. He then took her apartment key, went up to the floors she'd pressed when she'd first gotten into the elevator, tried every door until he found hers, and took her roommate, also a woman in her 20s, into the basement where he continued torturing and R-ing both of them until dawn. Maintenance found them that morning, and my dad was a responder. Again, my dad never told us stories. This one might have stuck out because he has 4 daughters, but I think it's gotta be up there in the creepy factor. Story 7. Military police officer. So I worked both law enforcement and corrections for a bit. In corrections, the main office was also the police services desk. Often it would ring and no one would be at the other end. Anyways, one time it rang and instead of a number, it had a descriptor that I don't remember exactly. Something like emergency phone 11. I was new and immediately called my superiors about it. They told me to drop it and never report anything like that again. Ominous, right? Anyways, the reason I told that is to tell this. Sometime later on patrol, I got dispatched to essentially an abandoned site on the base to respond to an emergency phone call. No location at first because radio didn't know where emergency phone 11 was, and was new to the base, so he didn't get the same memo to not report those calls. Radio then went on to say that the caller had sounded frantic and thought they were being chased, meaning that someone had actually been on the other end. Radio eventually digs up some old maps that label a emergency radio 11 location and relays them to me and my partner, so we drive there in a hurry. There's no phone, just a broken pole where one had once been. Okay, that is legitimately pretty creepy. How do you not look into that further and try to figure out the mystery? Seriously, I'm the kind of curious, nosy person that would get killed off in a horror movie for looking too deeply into these kinds of things. Story 8. Went to a welfare check. A neighbor called in. He hasn't seen this guy for a few days and the lights have been on for a while. I go and look around and find no footprints or tire marks in the snow, recent storm. I checked the garage and nothing. I checked the house, which was unlocked, and found the guy's cell phone, keys, wallet, and cash with the TV on. That's when I realized this was now a dead body search. I looked everywhere inside and outside the house and around the garage. There were several old junk vehicles on the property, but again, no tire marks or shoe prints or anything. I called all the recent numbers on his phone and no one heard from him. Only so much I can do, so I issue a BOL and we start getting NCIC paperwork ready. Next day, the day shift officer goes to follow up. Turns out the guy was plowing his driveway and either had a medical condition or something and either passed out or died on the spot and crashed the truck into the other junk cars, which then caught on fire. Edit: investigation leads to the fact that this happened a week before I got this call, leaving only a pile of bones in the front seat covered in snow. I felt like crap for not finding him that night, but it was really creepy knowing his remains were inches away from where I was searching. Story 9. From my post 8 months ago. Got a call for a missing child, go to the home to find the mother highly distressed and not sure what to do. I call in everyone to first search the home and property. I decided to search the backyard since it was a large wooden lot with no visible fence. After about 10 minutes, I found the boy. He was caught on an old chain link fence in the woods that was blocked by a bunch of trees so you couldn't see it from the house. He had basically gotten strangled to death on the fence. He must have been climbing on it, fell, and got his hooded sweatshirt caught on it. The worst part for me was having to call it on the radio, knowing the mother might hear it inside from one of the other officers' radios. Story 10. It was a stormy night on the Oregon coast. A lady was driving drunk and ran into the back of a parked school bus. When she did, her car caught on fire, but she was able to escape. When I found her slowly walking down a side street, I was telling her to stop and turn around. When she turned around, her lower jaw was gone and she was totally dazed. Her tongue was sticking straight out of the top of her neck and she was trying to talk. She ended up surviving but needed tons of plastic surgery. Well, I'm glad she ended up okay and nobody else got hurt, but also, oh my God, that is horrifying. Folks, don't drink and drive, please. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.